Hi, Claire.
Hi, Zoe. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Great column today.
Yeah, so today I wrote about Queensland introducing gender self-identification laws, and surprisingly, this hasn't really been covered that much in our media. I didn't see anybody writing about it for The Australian, which is the paper that I write for, other than Quillette, which is surprising because it's a pretty huge shift. And the laws are described as modernising birth certificates, and what they mean is that you can be a man, identify as a woman, and you can go and get your birth certificate changed by the Queensland government, and you don't need any kind of verification of anything.
No doctors sign off, nothing anymore.
Nothing, no verification that you have gender dysphoria, no verification of anything. All you have to do is rock up and say, I'm a woman. And you can be a man and do that and then be issued with a female birth certificate. And so in my piece, I just wrote about how these laws have been passed in other jurisdictions and have led to some embarrassing results for the politicians who have championed them. And the most obvious example is Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, who was a champion of gender self-ID laws. But then this difficult for her at least, situation arose when a man who was a rapist started identifying as a woman whilst in custody, and he had a shaved head and put on a blonde wig and started calling himself Isla Bryson and asked to be transferred to a women's prison, and he was. But news got out, obviously, and there was public backlash, and the public backlash contributed to her political demise. And so something similar might happen in Australia. We don't know. But I have been surprised by the lack of discussion, the lack of pushback, and the general acceptance by the opposition regarding these laws, because they are quite transformational. They really upend, they erase any legal recognition of biological sex. And, there are obviously unintended consequences that can follow from that.
And I always wonder what happens with research and demographics and things like that. Like, how are we supposed to keep track of how many of the sex balance?
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, people might argue that these laws affect such a tiny minority, they're not going to mess up our statistics. However, crime statistics refer to a small minority of the population as well. And if we're going to have a 50% increase in sex offending among women, that is going to mess up our crime statistics. So, it's only a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of women who ever engage in sex offending. So 98% of all sex offenders are male. And if we're going to have a sudden surge in women being convicted of sex offences, it is going to mess up our crime statistics, which is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it just takes away the whole meaning of being a woman. Like, what's the point? If anyone can say they're a woman and they don't even need a doctor or any other professional to justify it or to, prove it.
Yeah, and I mean, we've discussed this before and our position on this is fairly clear, but I've been surprised at the lack of pushback from opposition. Like, I haven't seen any kind of opposition from Queensland's opposition party. I mean, I wouldn't have a clue what their stance is, and I'm surprised that the proponents of these laws argue that the only people who care about them or the only people who question them are religious conservatives. Now, I'm not a religious conservative.
No.
It's not a religious matter at all. It's a scientific matter.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a matter of truth. And, we've talked about it before, that the truth is actually, important. And
it's a I conclude my column by arguing that, this is sort of the apotheosis of this trend towards sanctifying feelings above objective realities. And it's gotten to this absurd point, and maybe it will be a bit of a tipping point back to normality when there is more public awareness and perhaps public pushback or backlash. I mean, it has to come at some point.
And as you said, the irony is that the more emphasis we put on feelings and being sensitive to people's feelings, young people are actually more depressed than ever, and with high rates of anxiety. So having these bespoke identities.
It's clearly not helping people become more healthy at a population level. We've never had more mental health disorders among young people ever before. And so offering up a la carte identity, offering up all of these ways that we can identify as either binary or non-binary or two gender, two spirit, or, I have ADHD and I'm neurodiverse and I'm this and that, I'm that. I mean, that's not helping young people. It clearly isn't. So
do you think that young people are also more willing to sort of identify as mentally ill or self-diagnose?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that's part of it too, that perhaps they're actually not as mentally ill as they say they are, but
it's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that, but, it's quite possible that – so there's been a strong push to destigmatize mental illness, and that's important. We definitely do need to destigmatize mental illness, but we've destigmatized some types of mental illness and neurodiversity, not all. I think psychosis and schizophrenia are still very much stigmatized. I don't see a trend of young people coming out saying that they're psychotic or schizophrenic. And arguably they're the most serious mental disorders that, people can be afflicted with. But we certainly are seeing a huge wave of people identifying themselves as having ADHD or autism and a range of other either disorders or just differences. I mean, not all of these things are actually disorders. I mean, it's just being different. And it's not that we should start stigmatizing difference again. I don't think we should, but there might be a trend of people sort of wanting to have something that is special and clinging and grabbing a label that helps them feel special or different or
less guilty about just being a normal person, which isn't that
normal
cool anymore.
Normal is not cool.
Yeah,
normal is not trendy. But there was a song back in the 80s. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's Hip to Be Square.
Yes, yeah.
We need another song like that.
Isn't that in a horror movie?
It's Cool to Be Normal.
Oh, that's in American Psycho. It's Hip to Be Square. Yeah.
It is actually cool to be normal. There's nothing wrong with being normal.
And I think the counter sort of revolution or cultural shift will be that identifying as like trad. It's like, normal and traditional, and the pendulum is going to swing. It's already swung.
Yeah.
And that's why you have, the rise of like Andrew Tate's and people like that to some extent.
Yeah.
Because people they feel like they have to choose. It's like blue-haired, crazy people, liberals, or Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
And I think we both want to show that you can be in the middle and you can be a normal, healthy person with happy, healthy relationships with people of all different types politically. And
well, ultimately what you identify as is pretty irrelevant, and what is important is how you treat people and also what you achieve with the gifts that you've been given. And identity, no one really cares. Like in the real world, no one really cares about your identity. I mean, you might some people might pay attention to you on social media or TikTok if you have a hashtag particular identity, but no one really cares in the real world. And it doesn't make you, having a special identity doesn't make you rich, doesn't make the people around you necessarily love you more. So, you know, it's a bit of a delusion that kids are operating under, that it's their identity is important. No one really cares.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. It's like you see so much of this online, but, you know, in our office today, for example, like you don't see much of it. You don't see, you know, people identifying as obscure out there things. Or you said that a kid in here wanted to be referred to as not the moon, but a moon.
Yeah.
And, you know, as cats and stuff. And maybe teachers would say they are seeing more and more of it, and I'm sure that's true. But, you know, in your day-to-day life, I don't see that much of it.
Well, unfortunately, there is, you know, you can sort of make a living if you get onto the disability pension and you do identify as having some kind of chronic illness. You can sort of make a living out of being a patient. And it is a pathway. It is one particular pathway. I wouldn't recommend it unless one was genuinely unable to work. It is a pathway, and people can survive or have some kind of existence going down the road where they sort of play up whatever it is that they might have wrong with them.
Yeah.
But it's potentially, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it because it's potentially not the best pathway towards contentment and fulfillment and having a happy, healthy life.
It's very interesting, though. Not even people who claim to be, you know, disabled when they're not, or to have a chronic illness, although there are lots of influencers. I think there's a special name for them. I don't know, chronic illness influencers who make a living off this. But even just, you know, people who claim that they're severely like allergic to something like dairy-free or lactose, you know, gluten-free. There's been a rise in that too. And like my mum recently went to the gastroenterologist and she was saying that, oh, maybe I'm allergic to this and that. And he said to her, it's a very like, you know, white woman thing.
Yeah.
And it sort of is like, you know, I don't know why. I don't know the correlation between, you know, being an educated sort of woman. It's mostly a female thing, I think, like to sort of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's kind of mysterious as to why. I mean, some people have argued that, you know, all of this kaleidoscope of identities has come about because we're a very rich society and people have got nothing better to do. That's one argument. Another argument is that, you know, people are being exposed to a lot of ideology at university and maybe this is a product of people being overeducated in our current university system. To be honest, I don't have an answer myself. I think it's curious. But all I know is that focusing on one's identity is not a proven method for leading a happy life. What we know makes people happy is having good relationships with other people, so treating other people with respect and kindness, and then having some sense of mastery or achievement. So that means working hard, developing a skill, being good at something, getting recognition from your peers for being competent. That's what makes people happy.
Not for being a victim.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some people are happy to be recognized as victims. Maybe.
In the short term, it would feel great.
Possibly. But I don't see how that could be sustainable long term. Do you really want to feel like a victim for 30 years, for 40 years? I mean, come on. Seriously?
Yeah. Well, you were talking about university and how maybe some of these ideas are coming out of universities, or at least being sort of exacerbated.
Yeah.
And I would agree. And we published a very interesting article by Peter Wood this week in Quillette.
Great article.
Incredible. It's
called After College.
Yes. There was a really good quote here. Where was it?
I thought it was interesting that he pointed out that, sure, there is radical ideology in the university system, but the problem with the education system is not necessarily the radicalism, it's the emptiness.
Yes.
So at least in when we're thinking about the humanities or the liberal arts side of education, there's sort of been a hollowing out of scholarly principles. You know, in the past there were the subjects such as history or English had very, you know, they'd built up over hundreds of years, or even philosophy. They'd built up over hundreds of years and they have a foundation in scholarly principles. However, a lot of new subjects that have arisen out of maybe since the 1970s, they lack those scholarly principles. And so there's just this vacuousness or emptiness, and almost any kind of radical or fringe ideology can come and fill it.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah. The quote that's on that topic says, contemporary college is so lacking in a coherent intellectual core that anything that students run into that rings of passionate advocacy wins admiration. Whether it's Black Lives Matter zealotry, transgender raving, anti-Semitic bloodlust, and post-colonial or Indigenous fableism, each attract cultic worshippers who mistake their idols for critical thinking. Because they've been led to believe that critical thinking means attacking whatever stands in the way of today's version of social justice. And wow, that rang really true for me and my experience at university. And, you know, it's also just that you're at that age. You know, I'm sure if I were to go to university right now, I wouldn't be like that. But that's what I was like.
So you've described yourself as having been a vegan Marxist feminist before. Was that prior to university? Did you identify as a vegan Marxist feminist prior to university, or just while you were at university?
Yeah, I got into these ideas when I was about 14 or 15 and I started going on Tumblr, and I'm not sure how I came across this content, but I'm naturally a very curious person and was probably interested in, you know, some of the big picture ideas and you know, was very, and still am, compassionate, and I care a lot about suffering, and I started, you know, to see animals suffering and the vegan propaganda, and then was reading, you know, all these activists who were saying, well, you know, if you're going to be a feminist, if you think you're a feminist, then how can you drink milk? Right. Because that doesn't make sense, you know. The female cows are shackled and and then, you know, how are you going to be a vegan and a feminist if you're not anti-capitalist? Right. Because it's all part of the system. The system is patriarchal and, you know, hurtful to animals inherently. So you have to, you know, it's a suite.
All of it. Yeah, it has to come in a package.
And I felt a lot of pressure to really adhere to every sort of tenet of the sort of religion. Yeah. In a way.
Yeah.
And at this time I was a militant atheist. I still am. Like, I'd say I'm agnostic now, but I'm definitely, it doesn't preoccupy me as much.
Yeah. And coming out of that identity or that ideology, was that a gradual process or did it happen suddenly?
Well, no, it was quite gradual. I was part of all these feminist groups, these Facebook groups, and I just started seeing that there was more and more
authoritarianism.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to put a trigger warning on that. We've removed your post because you were talking about food, and you have to put a trigger warning for eating disorders, but all this stuff.
And so it was the behavior of the other people that turns you off.
And I could see that some of the girls, some of the moderators were sort of getting off on being authoritarian.
Cruel.
Authoritarian. Yeah. And they could use that power to virtue signal and act like they were just doing it for the good of the group or humanity or whatever. But actually it was a personal thing, and they loved the individual power.
Right. Because, you know, to be honest, there's nothing wrong with getting involved or interested in animal rights, and there's nothing wrong with looking into feminist activism and arguments. And I would say that there is something wrong with being anti-capitalist. But there's certainly nothing wrong with reading critiques of sort of free market fundamentalism. I mean, there's a difference between regulated capitalism and absolute anarcho-capitalism, which some people advocate for. So there's nothing intellectually wrong with any of those positions, except maybe the Marxist one. But it's interesting that the behavior of the other activists pushed you out or alienated you. That's definitely. And I think that experience would happen to a lot of other has happened to a lot of other people. Absolutely,
definitely. But then I went through this strange period of feeling very lost and like in the closet. I didn't want to admit that I wasn't okay with, you know, the authoritarian behavior, the bannings, the, trigger warnings, all that stuff. Because if you take issue with it, it's like, oh, so you're for triggering people with eating disorders. You're like, you know, you're the bad person. So I didn't have the confidence then to really come out with it, but I just slowly drifted away. And around that period, I came across you on Twitter. I didn't know about Quillette. I didn't know about you, and was so surprised that you were Australian and beautiful and young and smart and brave enough to say some of the things that I was thinking, but I myself wasn't brave enough to say. It was like, holy shit, blew my mind. So, and now I'm here.
Yeah, and we're glad you're here. And it's interesting how the dynamics of social media sort of set up this situation where you're either in the in group or you're in the out group. There's no in between. You're either one of us and one of the good people, or you're one of those bad, evil people. And this dynamic, it like you said, it's occurring in these feminist Facebook groups, but it seems to occur in a lot of groups. Like you could go on to mums groups who promote breastfeeding, right? If you are not for breastfeeding, you are evil. You're in the out group. I mean, you can see it on Reddit, like with people who think that anything that touches Quillette, anything to do with Quillette is somehow evil, and you're one of those bad people. It's like there's something inherent in our psychology that wants to be part of a group, part of a tribe of good, pure people who are doing the right thing, and those other people, they're just evil and they need to be either excommunicated or in some cases destroyed.
For sure.
And the scary thing is that, so I used to think that kind of psychological framework was, there was something about left-wing ideology that really tapped into that. But I've seen, over the years, it occur online, on social media among, right-wingers and even people who identify as independent. I see people who identify as being independent and heterodox sort of starting to think we're the good heterodox people and you're the non-heterodox people and you're bad. So it's like it can happen to any people in any group with any ideology.
Would you say it's just a human tendency?
Yeah.
That we have to be aware of.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we're both, I definitely have been, I've fallen victim to that as well, that type of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to be aware of it and catch yourself when you're doing it. And I would be guilty of doing it too, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I've also been the victim of those dynamics.
Yeah.
Where I've been excommunicated from groups that are left-wing, that are right-wing, whatever, just because I can't I can never conform to absolutely every single tenet of any group.
Yeah, I'm the same, and I think I naturally reject it too. I really hate, maybe it's an only child thing or what. Well, you're similar and you're not an only child.
Yeah.
But I've always like recoiled from having like a group identity. I don't like it. It makes me feel, I don't know,
well,
weird.
It's always going to flatten some part of your individuality, I think. Because to be a member of a group means that you have to agree with the group on every position they take. And, you know, I might agree with a particular group on 80% of their positions, but on that 20%, I want to have the freedom to disagree and dissent. And I do think that there might be a particular personality type that is a dissenting personality type. Some people call it contrarian. Yes, I'm a small c contrarian. What we've seen online in the last few years is that even the identity of being contrarian has become hardened and solidified. Like people now identify as being contrarian, and groups sort of coalesce around celebrity contrarians. And if you don't agree with the contrarian on everything, you're excommunicated from those groups. And I mean, it's ironic, right? But you know, I reserve the right to disagree with a contrarian and to dissent from whatever it is they're dissenting from.
And it's like heterodox thinkers are expected to be heterodox in absolutely everything. Like you can't agree with, you know, the orthodoxy when it comes to vaccines. Like, oh, you agree with that, so you're not heterodox anymore. Like, why can't you make up your mind on each issue?
An intelligent person or a rational person, I should be more specific, looks at issues on a case-by-case basis. And being anti-establishment on everything is just as lazy as being pro-establishment on everything. And we also have to have the humility to recognize that we might be wrong, and we have to allow ourselves to change our mind according to new evidence that comes to light. But you're right. I found the reflexive anti-establishment of many in the heterodox crowd during COVID kind of disappointing, because I felt that it lacked rigor.
Yep. Definitely.
And I mean, I'm anti-establishment when it comes to things like gender self-ID laws, but when it comes to other issues such as defence, national security, or public health, I'm pretty comfortable being pro-establishment.
Just going back to identity a little bit, I'm interested in what you would define, like what are some words that you would use to identify yourself? Like what's really important to your identity?
Well, I'm a mum and I'm a wife. I have a lovely husband, Harry, who you're friends with. And I'm Australian. So I think, you know, my national identity is important to me. I'm a woman and a real woman.
Do you think that's become more of your identity recently?
Not really. I've always felt like, I wouldn't say I have a gender identity, but I've always been interested in the female experience.
Me too.
And I mean, I don't really have a strong political identity. I wouldn't call myself a conservative or a liberal. Like I've said before, I'm a centrist because I want to reserve the freedom to shift around. If there's a policy presented by conservatives that I like, I will support it. If there's another policy presented by progressives that I like, I want to be able to support it. I don't want to be fixed into one position because I've identified as a particular thing politically. But I do believe that there are certain foundational principles that are important. So I support liberalism, I support democracy, I support free speech.
Humanism?
Humanism, yeah. And the scientific enterprise, scientific method. So, I mean, I support foundational principles if that translates into an identity, perhaps the identity is one of a small L liberal, a humanist. Yeah, something along those lines.
Interesting. I think people would like to hear that. That's why I asked. When we were talking about us versus them wanting to adhere to the group, I used to feel a stronger desire to do that when I was younger, and as time's gone on, it's dissipated a bit. But recently, I haven't told you about this, but so we published that article by Kevin Mims about the Princess Bride.
Yeah.
I haven't actually read it yet, sorry, Kevin, but lots of people have, and it's been very popular.
Yeah.
And an Australian sort of public figure, I won't say his name, retweeted it from your account. Yeah. And I was surprised that he followed you.
Yeah.
And anyway, he just tweeted it and said, like, loved this article. And I was looking through the comments because I always want to see whether Australian audiences know our name because, you know, most of our readers are in the US. And most of them were just, you know, chatting about other stuff. And then some guy said something like, loved the film, The Princess Bride, but you couldn't pay me to read something in Quillette, from Quillette. And I was feeling a bit cheeky. And I responded, I was like, what about if I paid you $2? And, you know, just went back and forth a little bit. I wouldn't say I was trolling, maybe I was, but I was just, you know, making fun because it's such a ridiculous thing to say. Yeah. As we were talking about last week, you read like Jacobin and Worldwide Socialist Web, you know. And then I looked at his profile and I could see that he was Aussie. Yeah. Just looked like a really normal dude. And I thought, I'm going to message him. And I just messaged him and said, hey, like, just out of curiosity, what's your gripe with Quillette? Yeah. Anyway, we had a bit of a back and forth, and it was all very polite. And he pretty much said that he just associated our name with some disgusting ideas. And I said, okay, what disgusting ideas? And he said eugenics, which I almost knew he was going to say. Yeah. And I was like, interesting. Okay, that's a very big term. Do you have some, like, where did you read this?
What's the evidence?
Yeah. And he couldn't show anything. And I sort of said, like, I hope you haven't just, you know, read what other people are saying online and just assumed it's true and associated our name with that. Yeah. Because it's a massive word to throw at someone. Like, how can you just do that, you know?
Oh, there's a surprising number of people who have formulated an opinion about who we are according to, on the basis of rumor and online slander, basically, and distortion and mischaracterization. And unfortunately, I mean, it has happened to us, but we're not the only victims of this kind of phenomenon. I mean, there's a large group of people who honestly think that J.K. Rowling is some kind of evil witch and she's transphobic and she's out there arguing for trans people to be stripped of their rights, when in reality she's just trying to protect women's right to have single-sex spaces and for women not to be erased because of gender ideology. And so there's this phenomenon where distortions and mischaracterizations can take root and can go viral online and fail to be corrected. And, you know, that I don't know how many people, but there's a lot of people who have never read any of our articles, have never come across us as editors, but have formulated or have arrived at this opinion because of what someone else has said. And it's quite disappointing. And it's a reminder that we all need to read primary sources.
Definitely.
So if we're going to form an opinion about a book or a news outlet or whatever, probably a good idea to go and check it first before relying on secondary sources.
Definitely.
I mean, I've been guilty in the past of dismissing a book because I read a book review that has been critical. But really what responsible critics should do is read the book before coming to their own, before necessarily relying on a review, because some reviews can be very biased, very skewed, and can be straw man. Present straw man arguments. And that's what's happened to us. So all of this stuff about eugenics and whatever is straw man of our position. Our position is simply that there is no limit to what you can investigate scientifically, and that genetics actually matters. And you know, there's a trend at the moment to discredit any kind of science involving genetics by smearing it as eugenics.
Or human difference, right? And I mean, Peter Singer, the well-known Australian philosopher, was tarred with the same brush. When I worked at Think Inc. and we toured Peter, some of the most backlash we got was regarding him being an evil eugenicist, because he supported abortion, which is like the most lefty thing you can do, but and his belief was, he's a utilitarian, and he said that if a baby is going to be born with a severe disability that would ruin their quality of life and cause a life of pain, then as a moral philosopher, his belief is that abortion or terminating the pregnancy is the most ethical decision. And from that, from decades of thought and writing, people just say, eugenicist. And come and protest the shows and stuff. Like, it's so dumb.
Well, they're trying to confuse, I mean, everything, there's a lot of stuff we do. So when I was pregnant, I had a genetic screening test for my second pregnancy.
Is that normal? It's
normal now, yeah. It wasn't around in my first pregnancy, but it picks up on, the test should be able to pick up on genetic defects. And so, I mean, technically that's eugenics. Like if you were to terminate I didn't terminate my pregnancy because it was fine, but if you were to terminate a pregnancy because of a screening test like that, technically that is eugenics, right? But the way the term is used is in reference to the policies of Nazi Germany, which were coercive. So it was the policies were imposed by the state. They weren't voluntary. So when we're talking about people voluntarily getting a genetic screening test done and voluntarily choosing to terminate a pregnancy, I mean, is that the same thing as Nazi Germany? We would probably say no, because it's not coercive. And so, I mean, there's a bit of confusion over what people use the term. The term is not used to further debate. The term is used to shut down debate. Like the term Nazi. It's just like calling someone a Nazi. You're not interested in any kind of truthful or honest debate about whatever the issue is. It's just trying to smear another person with and basically associate them with just the most evil atrocities in history, and the goal is to shut down debate. So the people who do that I mean, they've got their own agenda, and the agenda is not one of seeking truth or seeking civil debate, that's for sure.
They've got to find something better to do with their time. My God. Anyway, and the irony is that these words lose all meaning, and like Peter Singer is the son of Jewish refugees from Czechoslovakia, somewhere in Eastern Europe. Like, he's literally a victim of
the Holocaust,
eugenics and Nazism, and then people are throwing those words at him. It's just so ridiculous, and these people don't see it. I don't know. How can we make them see it? They should listen to this podcast. They won't, because they'll just see our name and
it's the issue of authoritarian authoritarianism in the name of compassion is a tricky one. I don't think we're going to solve it today, but I think we've canvassed some of the issues.
Definitely. Until next week.
Until next week, Zoe. Thanks
Bye.
for chatting.
Thanks. Bye.